Chapter 5. A Royal Visit. 3 years had passed, and I was now 10 years old. House Orodum now ranked as the largest noble house in Orzammar. It took me a year to meet with every family that wished to swear their services and bloodlines to my house. Servants, merchants, artisans, warriors, surfacers, and what few casteless there were left, all made requests to join. I even had families already dedicated to other noble houses seek to join House Orodum. I respectfully declined anyone who was already sworn to another house. This was met with disappointment from the applicants, but respect and thanks from the houses they were from. For everyone else, I had to think of a way to discern who I would accept and who I wouldn't. In the end, I asked the applicants to create the exact same thing. Smiths would design a set of armor for the warriors of my house. Artisans would craft something with the symbol of House Orodum on it, depending on what their crafting specialty was, while servants were given the same room to clean and the same meal, and guests to serve. The 10 best applicants were accepted into the house. Those who were not accepted were given my assurances that something special would be happening in the next few years, where they would get an extra opportunity. This left them with some hope. Warriors were a different matter altogether. House Idukan boasted the strongest warriors in Orzammar, and I was given 100 of them already. These 100 warriors belonged to a total of 7 families, a laughably small martial force for a medium-sized, noble house. It wouldn't be nearly enough for House Orodum, so over the next 2 years I went to every proving tournament that was held. Farron and I wrote down statistics on the warriors who participated, the families they belonged to, and their win-loss records. We obviously couldn't claim the veterans, since they would belong to other houses already. But the young bloods, the up-and-comers, those were who we kept our eyes on. By the time I turned 10, House Orodum boasted the 100 most skilled young warriors in Orzammar and had the loyalty of their families. All told, House Orodum had nearly 1,000 warriors. Luckily for us, Rika had managed to convince several farming-focused surface families to join House Orodum, so we weren't hurting on food or supplies. Rika was the first family I accepted into House Orodum. The assembly, with a recommendation from me, had arranged a marriage between Rika and a surface business owner named Veron Barask. Veron's business focused on importing specialty goods and had a wide network of surface merchant contacts that could find just about anything. He was also formerly casteless, just like Rika, and they were close to the same age. He was young, but he was talented when you gave him a chance to schmooze someone into a deal. They were going to be married when they both came of age. Veron was so grateful for the marriage recommendation and to be part of House Orodum because of it, that he swore that if there was anything he could ever do for me, I simply had to name it. So I gave him something to look for and 2 names he might look for to start. If he could find what I wanted, it would create a massive opportunity for bringing more hope to the dwarves and retaking the lost tigers. Farron was 13 now, and growing into his strength. He was pushing Ogren to his limits in some of their sparring matches. It wouldn't be too long now before Farron took command of the house guard. Granted, Ogren was in his 30s and was losing a step or two, but you'd never hear me tell him that. Not that it mattered, really. Ogren and Branka were expecting a baby soon. Thanks to diminishing Branka's reputation slightly by figuring out what she had created, and then endearing myself to her by becoming her student in smithing, she never became obsessed with the anvil of the void. Without this obsession, she and Ogren continued to grow closer. I was genuinely excited for them and insisted that I be named an aunt. They agreed, of course. Why wouldn't they? Dagna had become one of the best enchanters in all of Orzammar. Her obsession with the craft only grew when I was able to show her all of my magic. We used a great deal of funds to acquire fresh lyrium so that Dagna could ensure that every warrior in House Orodum was granted an enchanted weapon. Dagna was also able to indirectly peruse the library of Ferelden's Circle Tower. This was made possible when representatives from the Circle started visiting Orzammar after they heard of a dwarf that could use magic. I agreed to speak with them and run tests for them, but only if they came to Orzammar, and only if they brought 10 books every 2 weeks. Dagna had gone through so many books on magic now that she was able to help me refine and perfect my spells. I wondered what good the circle was when someone with no magic could teach someone with magic how to cast spells in a more efficient and precise manner. I remember that in Inquisition, Dagna had become a master enchanter, and I wanted her with me every step of the way. Kala was now my personal attendant and the head of my household. All the servants reported directly to her. She ensured that the actual house was immaculate and that I never looked out of sorts. My clothes were always immaculate, and whenever the artisans who made them presented them to her, she ensured that their level of quality and design were up to her standards, which is to say, well beyond what my mother would have expected. This had an additional benefit in that any clothing or crafts sold from House Orodoom's craftsmen were highly sought after. Ruck had continued to study under Branca and was now nearly as respected a smith as the Paragon. He also had the opportunity to study under some of the other great smiths I'd accepted into House Orodoom. To his credit, he was getting used to modifying some of the outfits that were made for me with bits of tactically placed armor. If I'm being honest, I was starting to enjoy the mixture of regal wear with armored pieces and polished metal accessories. As thanks for his dedication, I invited his family to join House Orodoom. His father was ill, so giving him comfort and giving his mother reliable quarters seemed the least I could do. One dark cloud among all the silver linings was that I was no longer the youngest Aeducan. While he'd come along a little later than expected, my mother gave birth to Belin not long after I'd been named a Paragon. Farron and I had discussed that this might not mean much of anything at this point. Normally in the noble dwarf Oregon, Belen would have had Tree and Murdered and the noble dwarf character, in this case me, blamed for it, for said them to be an outcast, and took over House Aeducan. Now, though, he'd be about 5 years younger than normal, and I made sure to dote on him even more than Trian did with me. Trian was, of course, curious about why I would devote so much of my free time, which was extremely rare, on Balin. I explained to him that I wanted to be just as good of a big sister to Balin, as Trian had been a big brother to me. It also didn't hurt that I was hoping I could change Balin from being the wicked little schemer that he ended up being, into a more noble and admirable person. So while I couldn't spend much one-on-one time with Balin, I had insisted to Mother that he be brought to me every day once he could walk, so that I could be an example of how productive a member of House Aeducan could be, and how much good we could do for our fellow dwarves. I took an additional step by befriending Franlin Evo, the eldest son of House Evo. Franlin was considered to be an honorable and trustworthy dwarf who you could fight in a proving in the game. You could even send him the helmet one from the proving as a symbol of how much you respect him. It's never revealed why, but Franlin lies about what happens to Trian and your character is blamed. It's believed that Belin has some sort of leverage against him, which would explain why he did something so obviously against his character. I happened to be seated next to Franlin at a proving 2 years ago and struck up a conversation. We'd become fast friends as we discussed the proving combatants and how we believed the results of the proving would be. Over the next 2 years, I fostered the friendship by inviting him and his family to dinner dozens of times, asking them to help me choose through some of the applicants for House Orodoom. If I'm honest, I'd always shipped the female dwarf noble and Franlin. So it was my way of seeing what he was like, and if my ideas of what he was like were anywhere close to the reality of him. The big news was that everyone was preparing for a royal visit. King Merrick Theron of Ferelden had sent an envoy requesting permission for he and his retainers to visit Orzammar as a diplomatic visit. He wanted to strengthen the ties between Ferelden and Orzammar. The entire city was abuzz with activity in preparation for the visit. The surge of commerce from the surface dwarves and a smithing renaissance that had been occurring in Ferelden thanks to the Brancan fuel had made King Merrick wish for the visit. I was extremely excited because King Merrick knew the way to Ortantaig, and that meant that I could help Orta find the papers, which proved she and her family were nobles. Beyond that, it meant that I could actually meet King Merrick, Prince Kaelan, and Loghain Mactyr. These people were legends in the lore, and I was not going to miss an opportunity to meet and speak with them. I had House Orodoom working overtime to prepare the quarters for guests. I might not get to house any of the guests, but I wasn't going to take any chances. Veron had found some of the finest wines and ales from everywhere except Orlais for me. I specified that absolutely nothing was to come from Orlais. Father had swore to me that I would be given the chance to host the guests for dinner at my home at least once for the 2 weeks they would be here. He also mentioned that he thought that my reaction to their visit was the first time he'd ever truly seen me act like a child. I suppose I was especially giddy over the chance of meeting them. I actually found myself giggling over the idea. Ruck and Branka worked overtime to fashion a set of armor for me to wear for the occasion, and the artisans of House Oro Doom worked tirelessly to craft jewelry and a new gambeson coat as well. I instructed them to craft rings with the symbols of Therin, Maktir, and Oro Doom. One for King Marich, one for Prince Kylan, and one for Taran Loghain. Dagna even set to work enchanting the rings with resistance to cold. One thing I had insisted on was that House Oro Doom have outfits crafted for Father, Mother, Tree-Ann, and Peelin. I was not going to outshine my family. I wanted us all to look as grand as possible. On the day of their arrival, Father insisted that the royal family be at the gates, ready to welcome them. We stood together at the top of the steps that led to the gates of Orzammar, Father and Mother in the center, with Tree-Ann on their right, and me on the left with Balin in front of me. On one side of the large market area were 200 warriors from House I Dukan, and on the other side were 200 warriors from House Orodum. Along the mountainside, surface dwarves stood to watch as the human royal procession climbed the path to Orzammar. We could hear them before we saw them thanks to the echo off the mountain and sting from the sunlight. When the first banner crested the hill, I squealed with delight, and as the king came into view, I actually jumped for joy and pointed. "Calm yourself, Paragon." Tree-Ann chided. Yes, he still chided me, though not nearly as often as he used to, only when he knew it was particularly needed. "Show some decorum." I stopped jumping, but couldn't really stop grinning or squealing. "I'm sorry, Tree-Ann. I'm just so excited." Father cut in with a chuckle. "Come now, Tree-Ann. Allow her some levity. This is the first time she's met another royal family." Tree-Ann sighed and shook his head. Mother laughed. "You may act taciturn, Tree-Ann, but I know you're just as happy as your father and I am to see her acting her age for once." Tree-Ann let out a huff, but he didn't argue. Did he really regret me not ever acting like a child? I knelt down and leaned over Belen to point out the people approaching. "Look, Belen, that's Marich Therin, the king of Ferelden, and that's his son, Prince Kylan Therin. Oh, look there. That has to be Loghain Maktir, Tyrn of Gwarin, the king's best friend and one of the greatest warriors and strategists alive today." Belin looked at me. "Are they friends?" "Absolutely, they're going to be great friends." "How do you know so much about them?" Tree-Ann asked. I paused, realizing I was basically fangirling right now, but I quickly smiled at Tree-Ann. "I ask the mages all I can when they come to visit. I've learned all about them." Tree-Ann grumbled again, but that seemed to satisfy him. The procession stopped as soon as King Marich stopped in front of the steps. Along with Kylan and Loghain, Marich had brought 500 soldiers along with a retinue of retainers and support personnel. Marich dismounted, followed by Kylan and Loghain. Approaching the steps, Marich bowed. "Kind I Dukan, it is my greatest pleasure to see you once again." "The pleasure is all ours, King Marich," Father responded. "Can this be Prince Kylan with you?" Marich nodded and clapped Kylan's back. "Indeed it is. Kylan, say hello, lad." Kylan fumbled from the clapping and gave an awkward bow. "Greetings, King Endrin. My father has told me a great deal about you." "Has he?" Father chuckled. "All good things, I'm sure." Kylan seemed to flinch, not expecting the response. "Ah, yes, of course. I've never heard him say anything poorly about you." Loghain laughed and moved forward, offering a bow. "Don't prod the boy, Endrin. He'll faint from nervousness." I could feel Tree-Ann bristling from where I stood, and I didn't even have to look at him. Loghain had called Father by his name, without his title. I was surprised Tree-Ann hadn't set upon the man to throttle him or simply died from an aneurysm on the spot. Father simply laughed. "Loghain. I'm surprised Marich still puts up with you." Marich smiled and stepped closer. "I wouldn't be where I am now if not for Loghain. I'll always find a way to deal with him." The three of them enjoy a laugh before King Marich looked at Tree-Ann. "Prince Tree-Ann, is it really you?" Tree-Ann offered a bow of his head. "It is indeed, your grace. It is an honor to welcome you back to Orzammar." Merrick took a few of the steps so that he could take Mother's hand and kiss it. Queen Olinda, you're as lovely as ever. It's wonderful to see you again. Mother offered a small curtsy. Thank you, Marek. It's been too long. We're so happy to have you in Orzammar again. It's a pleasure to be here, Merrick replied. Will you introduce me to your two youngest children? Of course, Mother chirped. She tapped Belen on the shoulder. This is our youngest, Prince Belen I Dukan. Prince Belen, Merrick said, and bowed to Belen. I gave Belen a gentle nudge, and he returned the bow. The pleasure is all mine. It was a bit of a rocky introduction, but he managed it, and he was only 2, after all. Merrick then turned his attention to me. And who is this lovely young woman? I admit, it was everything I could do not to squeal. I was definitely grinning like an idiot. This is our daughter, Princess Merida Orodum. Merrick paused and looked at my mother. Orodum? Is she adopted? Not at all, Father interjected. Merida was named a paragon by the Assembly 3 years ago after she organized the establishment of the Surface Caste. Tradition dictates that a paragon gains a house of their own and takes a name of their own if they are already a noble. House E. Duken was founded by Paragon A. Duken, so tradition dictated she choose another name. Merrick locked eyes with me. Is that so? You seem to be someone worth keeping an eye on. He offered me a deep bow. I'm flattered that you think so, Your Grace, I responded. I'm truly honored to meet you and to welcome you and yours to Orzammar. I hope I'm lucky enough to spend some time speaking to you while you're here. I would like that very much, Merrick replied as he turned to Father. Now, with the formalities out of the way, shall we head inside? Father nodded and turned, signaling for the rest of us to do the same. We allowed Father and King Merrick to walk ahead, while Mother took Belen and followed behind them. Then Logain and Trian went together, and Kalen joined me by hooking his arm around mine. The human retinue filed in behind us, then the Idukan warriors, and finally, the warriors of House Oro Doom. The entire procession received cheers from the market district and all through the Diamond Quarter. That evening was primarily a large feast with a number of the more important human guests and nobles from Orzammar. Everyone ate, drank, sang, and celebrated well into the night. I took Belen to his room and sat with him until he fell asleep. After that, Kailan insisted on a dance which was sweet but awkward. A 10-year-old female dwarf is considerably shorter than a 15-year-old human male. Either way, the effort was sweet and appreciated. If I'm being honest, Kalen worked very hard to treat me like a princess. After the dance, I insisted on showing him the Diamond District, and we were escorted by Ogren, Farin, another House Orodum warrior, and 2 of the soldiers from the human retinue. We walked to the very end of the district, all the way to House Orodum. I explained to him that the district had to be expanded to accommodate the house and its grounds. I gave him a tour of the home, and by the time we were finished speaking, it was late into the evening. The human guards insisted on returning the prince to the palace, but I argued that it was too late for Kalen to be walking the streets. I offered them all rooms for the night, and sent a messenger to the palace explaining the situation, claiming all fault for keeping the prince too late. Kalan and his guards ended up staying the night. Kala woke me up early the next morning, insisting I get dressed quickly. She had me dressed and sorted in a few minutes, and then brought me to the dining room where Father, Mother, Trian, Pelen, King Marich, and Tyron Logain were all sitting and talking. I could feel the blood draining from my face as the embarrassment of not greeting them flooded through my mind. Logain was the first to notice me. He stood and approached me, offering me a bow. Princess Orodum, please forgive our presumptuousness, but your lady-in-waiting, Kela, I believe her name is. She insisted we come in and help ourselves to some breakfast. I hope we didn't disturb you. I couldn't help but notice that Logain had placed himself between me and the rest of my family and guests to allow me a chance to regain my composure. It took me several moments, but I finally put a smile on and came to my senses. Of course, I exclaimed while giving Logain an expression of thanks. My family and such distinguished guests are always welcome in House Orodum. Logain gave me a reassuring smile, then escorted me to the head of the table like a gentleman, pulling out my chair for me, pushing it in, the whole 9 yards. When we received your messenger last night saying that my son would be staying for the evening, I suggested we come for breakfast this morning, King Merrick explained, shooting my father a wily expression. And I concurred, Father said. I thought we'd make it a family affair. By the way, where is Prince Kaylan? I'm here, Your Grace, Kaylan replied, as Kayla escorted him into the dining room. Apologies. Your daughter was such a gracious host last night, allowing me to bombard her with questions about her life and your fine city. She was kind enough to entertain my queries and put up with me well into the evening. Goodness, Mother chuckled and grinned. You should consider how you phrase such things, Prince. One could easily misinterpret your meaning. Mother! Tree Ann and I both protested. That, and Kaylan's verbal tumbling in response to Mother's needling, elicited a thunderous bout of laughter from Father, King Merrick, and Loghain. Paragon Oro Doom wouldn't risk such a scandal, Trian insisted. And she's far too young for such talk. Merrick laughed and shook his head. Ah, Tree Ann, even as a boy, you were never much for levity. Levity is all well and good, Your Grace, Trian rebutted, but not at the expense of my sister's reputation. Calm yourself, Trian, Father laughed. No one here would believe such a thing, and everyone in the house knows no such thing happened. Allow yourself some room to laugh. And so went breakfast, with my parents, Merrick, and Loghain, digging into the evening Kaylan and I shared while taking every opportunity to make a suggestive joke. Ironically, it was left to me to entertain Kaylan during most of the visit. So I escorted him around Orzammar, showing him the market district, the recovering dust town, the surface market, and the businesses along the mountainside. I took him to a glory proving, and eventually to the shape rate, which was my favorite place in all of Orzammar. All of this was over the course of days. Unlike in the game, Orzammar was massive, and it took a great deal of time to walk anywhere. We became great friends over the course of the visit, and I admit, I could see what Honora would eventually see in him. Sweet and placating, but not the sharpest knife in the kitchen. He also ended up staying at House Orodoom for the entirety of the visit. It was the second week when I got my personal meetings with King Merrick and Tyrone Loghain. What they told me during that meeting, however, was not something I expected to hear.